Says here, it is critically important that you make the following announcements prior to, not just before, mind you, but prior to the start of the session. Signings. There is a book signing following this session. Book signing for this panel is located in the north signing area, line B, which is over there somewhere. And it says, this area is noted on the festival map in the center of the event program. Personal taping of sessions is not allowed, so you will be severely beaten as you try to escape if you attempt any such.
You have my permission to record my words, though. I'm serious.
Be real fast with the on-off button. Food and or drinks are not allowed in the session room. We've got our own stash. Please turn off all cell phones and pagers for the duration of this session, or you will be vaporized. Right. And this session, I'd like to welcome you all very much. I'm Harry Dove. I am the moderator of this session, and if anyone chose me to be the moderator of this particular nuclear pile, they are probably optimistic, but we'll see just how incendiary we can get. This is called Science Fiction, The Road from Here to There, which is one of those famous Festival of Books titles that can mean anything or nothing, which means we get to wing it up here.
It's improv. You're going to love it.
And I would like to welcome you all. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I'd like to let my fellow panelists introduce themselves, and then we will see where we go on the road from here to there. And I'll start on my left with Kage Baker.
Hi, I'm Kage Baker. I write science fiction and fantasy and horror. This is the current one out. It's called Rude Mechanicals. It's available from Subterranean Press. And this summer, the final installment in the Company Saga is coming out July 10th. Check Amazon. It's called The Sons of Heaven. Thank you.
I'm Cory Doctorow, and I'm a science fiction novelist. My latest novel was called Someone Comes to Town, Someone Leaves Town from Tor, and I've got a new short story collection out from Avalon Books called Overclocked. I'm just finishing up at USC, so I'm a temp Angelino. I have a Fulbright there. I'm a Canadian, so I'm the dirty foreigner in your midst. And so I'll be an ex-Angelino in just a few months when your government makes me leave, but it's been a lovely year. And I'm the co-editor of a website called Boing Boing that some of you might be familiar with.
My name is John Scalzi. I am nominee for Best Fan Writer, which is ironic. I have a new book out actually last week called Colony, which is the third book in my Old Man's War series. I live in Ohio where we have lots of Amish people, and so coming back here where I actually grew up is basically I came here specifically to eat double doubles. But I decided to drop by anyway, so thank you.
All right. Let's start it like this. Here, where we are now, is not quite where we expected to be when the science fiction, a lot of us who have some white in our beards, were reading when we were small, first came out. Why not? Start at this end this time.
Because it's expensive, that future is, and we didn't want to pay the taxes for it. And I think that's one of the major considerations. The other consideration is that humans, being humans, got lots of really important things wrong. I mean, you read the Heinlein, they're traveling in space, but they've got people who still need to read books for the logs, and it's just they went for a certain sort of mechanistic view, and they forgot a certain sort of commercial view. I mean, no one really imagined the internet. No one really imagined that that kids today would be sitting there texting each other, insane until well into the 80s and so on and so forth. So I think it's just a matter of they got blinded by what they saw as the bright and shiny objects and forgot a whole bunch of other stuff on the side.
So I think that science fiction is primarily a literature about the present. Sometimes it's honest with itself. The new William Gibson novel that I've just finished reading, it'll be out this summer, is called Spook Country, and it's a novel so futuristic it only could have been set in 2006. Sometimes it doesn't know it's about the present. It's not honest with itself. But I think that the way that we construct memory and our sense of the present and our sense of the future is by weaving together a tapestry of different sensations. So we remember bits and pieces of the past, and we kind of weave them all together to try and construct a coherent narrative. We do the same thing with the future, only the future has more holes in it. And so what do we fill the holes with? Well, we fill it with the present, because we have lots of present lying around to patch the holes with. And so we tend to think of the future as looking a lot like the present, but more so. And so, given that the early days of the technological boom of the 20th century was characterized by a kind of monolithic research initiatives, largely state-funded and coordinated, we tended to think of the future of consisting of very large pieces, very tightly coupled, a kind of Los Alamos future. And that, I think, explains a lot of the kind of Heinlein narrative of a future where, or better yet, an Asimov narrative of a future where there's only one kind of robot, only one company allowed to make them, and that persists for 2,000 years. That's a very kind of FDR New Deal vision of the future, and it's easy to miss a kind of nimble, chaotic, messy present in that kind of vision. I think the other thing that the category error that we make is we assume that there's such a thing as progress as opposed to mere change. So the carousel of progress at Disneyland, now Disney World, is probably the best example of this. This idea that there is a coherent narrative of the future in which today leads inevitably to a tomorrow that is in some way better, to a next day that is, as opposed to just a dynamic world where things are just different all the time. There's no such thing as more evolved or less evolved, just differently evolved, and each day is differently evolved.
I think also what we wanted out of the future was kind of based in 1950s expectations. I mean, where's my flying car? Where's my robot doing my laundry that I can talk to? That wisecracks. That didn't happen. You can have a stinking Roomba, if you don't mind that it frightens your pets. I can't have one. My parrot would attack it and probably kill it. So, also the idea that there would be there would be these huge stable blocks. History isn't really like that. The processes of human history aren't that way. All of history has been messy and new things constantly. It's simply that when you don't think too deeply about it, when you don't study it, you tend to go for a very simplified, like a child's drawing of a house, which is just, these lines and a pointy roof and a window, two doors, a door, two windows, and a chimney with smoke curling out. And you the future, I think, was kind of blocked in that way. And no, it's going to be messy the way time has always been. The way history's always been.
So, can I follow that up?
Sure.
So one thing I think that we missed about technology and continue to miss, although we're starting to get a better sense of it, is that technology historically advantages attackers and disadvantages defenders. To mount a defense, you need to have something that has no holes in it. To mount an attack, you need to find one hole in the defense.
Not always true.
Not always true.
See World War I.
See World War I. Indeed.
And the American Civil War.
But in the last century, this has been largely the case. So, for example, it's trivial for college students to undermine the Recording Industry Association of America. It's trivial for the Recording Industry Association of America to sue 700 college students a month. Neither one of them is capable of maintaining a status quo. Right, so what we live in now is an era of expanded dynamism, right, where everything is change and not progress, and that's because a status quo is nearly impossible to defend. That's great news if the status quo is something you don't like, and terrible news if the status quo is something you're on.
Right, but that's always as well. I mean, one of the things, is, and I think that Cage was right about this, is that we construct historical narratives that are very streamlined. There's the old joke that the victors write the history, but it's not just the victors; it's the people who can make a narrative, because humans have a predilection towards narrative. They have a predilection for everything sort of naturally progressing. I think Corey's actually right that it's not one thing or another leading to another. It's a whole bunch of damn things happening all at once at the same time.
Everything all the time.
Right, and some of it will pop and survive, and some of it will just collapse. So,
I think you made an important point, Corey, when you said that novels aren't really about the future, they're about the present. I think, this is particularly obviously true in the case of science fiction. I think it's also true in the case of any fiction. We look at the world through the mirror of invented narrative, but the world we're looking at is the one we live in at the moment when we're writing. And I think, that's one of the things that makes science fiction fun to do, because it lets you look at the world through a set of funhouse mirrors that you can't get through mainstream fiction. I think another thing that's happened, another reason that we don't have the space travel future that we saw in the 50s, is that it turns out, as we know more, the solar system is a less inviting place than we thought it was
That's for
sure.
a couple of generations ago.
And oddly enough, Mr. Turtledove, that's why alternate history has become so popular.
Well, I'll tell you what. All right, you pointed at me, so now you have to hear the commercial. That's what you get. I will tell you exactly why I write alternate history, because I was a science fiction person from the time when I was a real little kid, and because I have a doctorate in Byzantine history from this esteemed institution where my fanny is parked right now. Do you like fries with that? So if you have somebody who tries to write, and he's a science fiction fan, and he has a doctorate in history, what is he going to write? Extrapolate.
Fair enough.
But is there any future-looking science fiction that can't be classed as a kind of alternate history as well? I mean, it's all an alternate history of something, whether it's a history of the past or the future. Does it matter?
Well, I mean, all histories of the future are, by definition, alternate histories, because it's never going to be the same thing.
No, it matters with intent, I think, because with alternate history, you're messing around more with the, well, I don't know, it's a matter of degree, but with alternate history, you're messing around more with what was real, what might have been real. You're playing with real characters in altered situations, which is, some of the most fun you can have with your clothes on, really.
Well, one of the things that I do think is interesting is that when we're talking about alternate history, of course, you go back and go around and go back up. One of the things that's emerging recently, and I think S.M. Stirling did this very recently, is not an alternate history, but an alternate history of science fiction. He did the novel where he had a swampy Venus, and there's never been a swampy Venus except that it existed in the imagination of science fiction in the 1950s. And I think that's a really interesting sort of conservatism. And I would almost say that there's a yearning for the science fiction that used to was.
Steve's a dedicated reactionary.
Yeah, well, and I don't know that that's necessarily a positive thing. And this is, of course, me saying that after I shamelessly ripped off Heinlein in Old Man's War. So,
my basic assumption is that there are no new ideas anymore.
oh, don't do that.
No, it's true. There aren't. It's not what it's. All right, shall we quarrel furiously? Let's quarrel. No, it's in the execution, and you're obviously thinking I should be.
I just no. Yes, no. I think it's absolutely false that there are no new ideas. I think that what you get the ideas through the old-fashioned thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You get new variations. You get new feels. Feel for the future. It keeps. History repeats itself, but then you just keep adding on top of it. You spiral up, and you're spiraling into new territory as you do it. There's always something new. I mean, if we, it's the whole thing of, I don't know why any human being would ever need a personal computer in their home. It's the same.
You can
sort of
keep
thing.
your recipes on it.
Right.
But only if you're a woman.
Yes.
There's an amazing blog called the Paleo Future blog that actually that catalogs some of these early gonkers about what the future is going to look like.
Right. Yeah.
So one of the things that I think is a genuinely new idea, at least in the mainstream, something that no one ever really took seriously until recently, is the idea that you can drop collaboration costs so low, transaction costs so low, that you can do collaborative things without any kind of organization, right? That
Sure.
you can have the structure of the internet emerge from people making links between web pages, and then Google can just come along and find that structure. So you and I and anyone else who's ever written the web and made a link between two pages collaborated to show Google what the web looked like without any kind of overweening organizational principle. And that, I think, is a genuinely novel idea, and one that is thoroughly unanticipated in the old SF. It's, the old SF is about cabals, societies, organizations that come together to govern large technological endeavors. There's no sense that we might build spaceships like ants build hills,
right,
or British people form queues.
My other home.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, one of the things that we were talking about in the Los Angeles Times plug recently was the idea of these spacecraft that are just actually little tiny. They're basically ants, and instead of having humans going to Mars or something like that, you'd have thousands and millions of these tiny little things that do very small, dedicated things, but in aggregate, the build up. I do think that what we did miss in science fiction and what science fiction is catching up now with, ironically, is the idea of versus the monolith versus the individual. We are now much more trending toward the individual. I mean, the Campbellian stereotype is the competent man, but the competent man is always in service of some sort of larger institution. Then you have something like Accelerando, or
Charlie Strauss's
novel, where he basically has a guy his job is to think up stuff, and all he is an idea factory, and then it goes out into the universe and it is plugged in. It's chaotic, but it's individual, and I think that's where. And again, it's an issue of present versus past, what concerns us now, and I think that we are in an era of individualism.
So there's something else that's new. So I think we've had apocalyptic, we've had the idea of progress, right, of things getting better. We've had the idea of lapsing, things getting worse. We fell out of the garden and things are getting worse and worse and worse. We've had the idea, especially now, right? We've had the idea of the apocalypse at the end of things getting worse. So things get worse and worse and worse until it just crumbles, right? Until the apocalypse arrives. But what we've never had is a progressive apocalypse until the singularity came along. So the progressive apocalypse is things get better and better and better until they get so good that they cease to exist. Right, and it's kind of like
become
felling.
beings of pure energy.
That's called dying and going to heaven. Is what that's called.
But it's not, because you're not going to heaven because you reach the end. You're going to the heaven because you found the beginning. It's the plotzing future, right? It's the future where things get so good that you just plotz and you explode with delight, right? And
you
that
become
is
this big fetus in the stars.
right. And like all new ideas, it's composed of old ideas arranged in a novel fashion, but that is, I think, historically. I mean, you're the historian, but I think historically we haven't really had a narrative of things getting so great that we've had this narrative of things getting so bad that we crumble.
Right.
Well, because human experience shows that generally we do kind of crumble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it is true. We run toward entropy. So you're saying this next, the current field is anti-entropic science fiction.
Well, certainly if you read the Singularitarians, they're all about the end of entropy, right? They're all about bootstrapping ourselves out of entropy, right? Order arising from chaos, self-generating order as opposed to self-generating chaos.
Which is really kind of a neat idea.
Yeah, the second law of thermodynamics is more what you call guidelines.
Hope. What a novel concept.
You're waiting for me. This is an alarming.
Moderate, damn you.
All right, I will pass this one to you, John, since I haven't picked on you. The road from here to there. Where is there? Where is science fiction going?
Where is science fiction going? I think that science fiction is going wherever the audience wants it to go, and I think there's two reasons for that. One, of course, science fiction is a commercial business. I think, but the other thing is that people vote their futures with what they read and what they buy and what they talk about. The grand story of the cell phone. Okay, there's a reason why it's like, Scotty, I've landed on the planet of green women. There's a reason that cell phones look like this, which is that engineers, the geeks that they are, God bless them, were like, I want a friggin' communicator. Yeah, you're like, well, yeah, that's obvious. We should be having the communicator. the people see science fiction as aspirational. People see what they want out of elements of science fiction, and then they go do it. And so what happens is that I think to a very real extent, it's consumer driven. Now you have, movements in science fiction, the mundane movement, the new whatever, and they will come and they'll go as writers' fashions do. But what sticks is what works for the readers, for the people who are, for the geeks who have the imagination, who are willing to go, what's the next step here? So I think that's where science fiction going is exactly where you guys want it to go. Where do you want us to take you?
So I think that what we've seen in science fiction the last several years, probably starting with Star Wars, is a schism of futuristic and what I can't remember who came up with this term, futurismic fiction. Futurismic fiction is futurismic stories are stories that appear like they do in futurism. Not like they do in the future, but like they do in Alvin Toffler books or other popular books about the future, like they do in Tomorrowland. And so we have, science fiction itself is this like contracting enterprise, right? I mean, the World Science Fiction Convention brings in a few thousand people in a good year, right? Whereas there's this ever expanding enterprise of futurismic endeavor like science fiction comic convention. So in Toronto, where I'm from, the biggest convention, science fiction convention, draws like 600 people, and the anime convention draws 12,000 people. Right, and
Comic-Con down in San Diego is up in
people.
six figures now.
Yeah. And so on and so forth. And that futurismic world, I think, resonates with us in ways that we've never seen. That the written stuff just doesn't. Although it mines the written stuff for the raw material, but it's perfectly futurismic to have artificially intelligent android with a laser and a hologram generator that's this big and can withstand drops from tall heights that doesn't have a $3 voice chip in it, right? That's R2-D2, right? That's perfectly credible futurism, right? It's perfectly credible that they have matter transporters that can disassemble you, digitize you, record you, and reassemble you at will, but no one uses this to restore themselves from a backup when they die while they're on the planet, right? That's Star Trek. And that's futurismic, but not very futuristic. And I think that we are seeing an enormous uptake of futurism. I was in France this year, and steampunk, which is the idea that you graft kind of contemporary technology, it's very alternate history, contemporary technology on the look and feel of Victorian technology. A little like all those devices in the Will Smith movie Wild Wild West, which is probably the first kind of threshold event.
It was a TV show before it was a movie, and it was a really good TV show.
Well, but that's probably the threshold event for the leak of this meme, right, into mainstream culture. The clock punks, the mecha people, all of this stuff that has no bearing on where we're headed in the future, but is instead extremely futuristic and tickles our futurism bone. I think that's where the field's moving.
I just want to make sure that you don't have anything to say over on that end before I blather.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was actually very amused when you were like, why don't they back them up? It's like have a red shirt writer. It's like, in the event I've been destroyed, please reassemble me.
Why put anyone on the ship, right? Why not just send out an unmanned satellite that gets to where it's going, beams the people onto the planet's surface, then beams them back into the ship, sends the information back home so they know what their doppelgangers did on the surface,
but how's the
and then evaporates them.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Well, presumably the way that they evacuate their bowels, because all those things have zippers down the back, so presumably the way they evacuate their bowels is with the transporter, so they could also presumably perform all manner of coitus in this way too.
By the way, the first time
Some things
this
you
notion
can't
was done
unthink
was back in the 50s with Rogue Moon by Altus Budrys.
Yeah, sure. AJ was way ahead of his time.
Well, I think you bring up a really interesting point, which is that the idea that the Worldcon has a few thousand people, Comic-Con has 100,000 people. When science fiction writers freak out about science fiction as a shrinking market, they are thinking specifically about their own asses. I mean, science fiction has never been more popular than it is now. The problem is that it's Will Smith getting all the money and not me, and this is a real problem. And what we end up doing is that we end up having you write the books, and the question is then someone comes in and strip mines it and and make something more popular out of it. I think that a lot of science fiction writers resent that. I don't really see it too much as a problem because when, in fact, Time magazine says that Battlestar Galactica is the best TV series of the year, when Heroes, which is speaking of futurismic, and all these other shows and all these other things are doing so very well. We are living in the science fiction future. We were Moses, on the mountain. We didn't get into the promised land, but the problem is that we could have. I think.
All right. That leads me to my next question. I think I'll start this one with Corey because it seems appropriate. All right, in a world where books seem to be going the way that records were a few years ago, how the heck is a writer supposed to make a living?
So I'm going to channel Eric Flint here, who's much better at this than I am. So Eric has pointed out very eloquently that reading has never been a mainstream American activity. As Charlie Strauss says, the average American household has 2 books in it, and one of them is the Bible. Right. So
Charlie, living in Edinburgh, is an expert on this, of course.
Well, yes. but the fact, I think, is that in some ways there's never been a better time to be a writer.
Right.
Certainly, it's never been easier to get hold of a larger variety of titles
right.
In the history of the world. It's never been easier for people who love your books to find other people who love your books and to find people who might love your books and convince them to go out and buy your books. So all my books, the day they come out from my publisher, which is not some patchouli-scented group of info hippies, but Tor Books, the largest science fiction publisher in the world, they make those books available for free on the internet the day that they ship. From the bookstores, and you can share them and copy them and send them to your friends, because the chance that an electronic book is going to substitute for a print book is smaller than the chance that it's going to act as a substitute, as an enticement for the print book. As Tim O'Reilly says,
right.
My problem isn't piracy, it's obscurity. So, and I think that those two factors conspire together to make it easier for books to find their audiences than it's ever been before. And that's always been the biggest cost of publishing, not arranging for printing,
right.
but arranging for the book to find its audience.
Yeah, and let me follow up on that. Okay, kids in your audience, raise your hand. Anybody under the age of 25. How many of you text message? How many of you write blogs? How many of you, write email? Well, everybody will raise their hand. We have in our possession, as writers, the largest audience of writers and readers that there has ever existed, and you do it every single day when you send each other messages going, where are we going to go for dinner? You are used to reading as communication, used to writing as communication. There has never been a generation of humans for which writing has been so critical, and that reading has been so critical. And by God, if we can't capitalize on that and get our money from you, then we deserve to die.
I think
what's more, science fiction appears to be the only literature that people care about enough to steal on the internet. Which, the alternative is a lot worse, right?
Right.
Can you imagine being the literature no one cares about enough to steal on the internet? That's not the future that I would be very hopeful about.
The problem. Go ahead, Kate.
No,
please.
just saying, adding a word also that another way in which is easy for writers in a way it never was before. As a survivor of the dinosaurs, I learned to type on a Smith Corona.
No.
But you had to put pieces
Madness.
of paper in.
Madness.
And when I was stuck on a research point, how many windows are there in the Vatican? What library is open? Well, who can I call? How do I know? And I'll just wing it, and no one will catch it. Sure, they won't. And they always do. Now, when I always swore, no, I'm going to continue doing my manuscripts longhand, and then I got a computer in 1994. And it's like, son of a bitch, I can. Goodbye, whiteout.
Oh, now
Goodbye, Smith Corona.
Now, see, I cop to still doing first drafts in longhand, but not because I don't use the computer, just because my style is tighter when I'm limited to about 10 words a minute, because the crap doesn't get past my brain. And I save a bunch of rewriting.
The way that for me that computers have changed writing is when I never didn't write on a computer. So when people talk about it's gone through 4 drafts, I'm always like, why? Because you can fractally draft. It's like you go back and you change things. And I remember when I was in high school, they're like, oh, we have to have a first draft. So I would write my paper, and then I would go back and I would deconstruct it and write a really crappy version of it, print it out on a dot printer, and like, this is the first draft. And they're like, oh, wow, I can see so much improvement. But yeah, that's an example.
The one thing in what you said, John, that makes me kind of wonder is, yes, people right now are more literate and more necessarily literate in the advanced West than they ever have been. I wonder if part of this, however, is merely a function of limited bandwidth and how long it's going to last, because pretty soon it'll
hello YouTube,
oral and visual will replace
Well, I think because the thing of the matter is, how is text messaging, which personally, being on the other side, being on the flashing crystal side of 30, and if you actually get that reference, you are also on the flashing crystal side of 30. I just, people send me text messages. It's like, why didn't you just call me? Because it's so much quicker. It's not necessarily, people do it for their own reasons. In some senses, writing is always going to be a more practical medium for certain things. People do actually genuinely like to read. We've had a really excellent visual media in film and TV for 110 years and 70 years respectively, and yet, as Corey mentions, largest number of books out there. Teenagers are reading more. So it's not just what people find convenient; it's what they actually like to do. You guys like to read, and we love you for it.
So.
Drowning. Today I see my 8-year-old niece lugging something the size of a freaking dictionary, and reading it cover to cover. It's like, I don't care what it's about.
Yeah.
I don't care who she ripped off. More power to her.
No, it's all right. I just blew my buffer. I had something really pithy to say, and it just went.
Wait 5 minutes.
It's in death knell now.
But yeah, I mean, I do think that people are actually enthusiastic about reading. I mean, I do. I think it's just a matter of finding stuff that speaks to them. I think one of the very exciting things about science fiction is that for the last 20 or 30 years, if you had a kid who came in and was like, I'm interested in science fiction, what do I read? Then they would always hand them Asimov, Heinlein, Bradbury, the classics. And the problem with the classics is that it's a vision of the future that is 40 or 50 years old.
They've been burned.
Yeah, exactly. We're very fortunate now that we are actually living in a time where there are new writers who are actually trying to get the people who haven't already been converted into geeks. I think that probably 20 years from now, we will say one of the most significant science fiction writers is Scott Westerfeld. And he writes YA, his Uglies, specials, and his upcoming book Extras. And they're hugely successful, and they're hugely popular, and they're aimed at teenagers. And the teenagers are eating it up because it speaks to them contemporarily. And that's what the genre needed. No offense to science fiction, which I love because I write in it, but for a very long time, it was basically had its head up its own posterior because it was science fiction people going top that.
It's a nicer way to say it.
Yeah. Okay, self-regarding, but it was always science fiction writers saying to science fiction writers, top this, and you can say it's like the Beach Boys and the Beatles. It's like one comes out with Pet Sounds, the other comes out with Sgt. Pepper, the other one comes out with Smile or doesn't, and it's the same sort of thing. But when you're already way over here geek-wise, you can crawl into your space. You actually do have to go out and convert the masses, and this is where TV and movies have been successful, and writing has not.
So one thing about science fiction is that it defined the dominant culture of the internet, right? The first social organizations on the internet that weren't about the internet itself were about science fiction, right. Star Trek news groups and so on. And so a lot of the conventions of communal or collective activity on the internet come out of science fiction. And a big piece of that, and a big piece of science fiction has always been to collectively build on the worlds that were written by authors. So you have two different kinds of storytelling. You have the authorial storytelling where an author sits down and writes a long considered piece, and then you have the fantasy storytelling where you have a kind of collective round-robin kind of campfire exercise around the circle where people try to top each other. And we have a really flourishing communal activity on the internet of fan fiction, fan films, and YouTube, fan music, all of this stuff. I mean, it's challenged by Backwards Law and so on, but it's growing faster and faster every day, and not just in science fiction. I mean, music fandom, all those fandoms growing according to the conventions of science fiction. Right. And there's a temptation to look at this stuff and go, well, it's not very good art. Right? But the point of art, I think, is how it makes you feel. And the way that this stuff makes you feel is while you're working on it. While you're working on fan fiction with the other fan fiction people.
I need to speak to this for a minute. Just because when I was 18 years old, all right, you guys can all blackmail me with this after it comes out. When I was 18 years old, I wrote a sequel to The Lord of the Rings, yes. So, yeah, been there, done that.
So these things are often collective endeavors, though, right? Like most people who read fanfic write fanfic.
Right.
And they're part of fanfic groups.
Right.
And they're what they're doing is something collective together as a social exercise. And the way that the fanfic makes you feel while you're writing it, it makes you a sense that you get while you're reading one of those other more considered things. And going back and looking at it after it's done is like judging sex by what's left sheets, right? The important thing, it's the act itself, and so there are different kinds of
I can't unthink that
art.
one now.
Also,
literary activity.
And some of it is very good as literature as well.
Literary activity is like anything else in one regard. Sometimes the fact that you lose your cherry is more important than how you lose it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that, because we talk about fanfic a lot, and one of the things that I say is that a writer or as a media sort of thing, if you actually don't have fanfic, your universe has failed and you need to start over. Because what fanfic is methadone to your authorial heroin, right? Which is, how come it takes you so long to write a book? It's because it's 100,000 words, man. All right, well, I'm going to go write something in the universe, and they're going to go play in their universe. Like, I'll go over here in the sandbox, have a good time. When you come back in and add something to the canon, we'll incorporate it in. But if you've got fanfic people, then you can get that Mercedes.
And from a writer's perspective, the nice thing about this is a lot of the heavy lifting is borne by fans themselves. So like Neil Stephenson wrote this great kind of why I didn't answer your email letter that he posted on his website. And one of the that when you read a great book, it's like you and the author are enamored together, right? And you're like experiencing these incredible adventures with the author, but the author isn't experiencing them with you.
Right.
So when you send Neil Stephenson a note saying, do you remember when you and me and hero protagonist were in that buy and fly on the way to Alaska, and those rednecks came at us, we had to kick the shit out of them with our katanas? He was there, you were there, hero protagonist was there, but he wasn't there with you. And if you can find someone else to tell war stories with, apart from him, he can get on with writing the next book.
All right, we've been running our mouths for about 40 minutes. Let's see what the audience has to say. I am bidden to ask you. There are microphones up here at the left or right. I am bidden to ask you to come up so your words can be recorded for posterity. If you have questions.
That's right. You can't record yourself, but we can record you.
That's right, sir.
I have two questions. Corey, you mentioned finding your audience. Would you recommend putting out your novels on the internet?
So I think that what making works available on the internet for free does is takes people who love your work and makes it easy for them to share it with other people.
Right.
What it doesn't do is convince people to love your work.
Right.
And so I think that writers are like snowflakes, and if you're the kind of writer who's already found some people who want to make your work known to their social circle, it makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that it actually just accomplishes the base task of getting people interested in your work.
Right. No, let me amplify on that, which is that if all you do is go, here's my novel and it's online, it doesn't do you any damn good, because people are like, why do I want to commit hours and hours and hours of reading this stuff, which is not likely to be good? If you already have a web presence, then it's that much easier. My suggestion to anybody who wants to put their work online is develop a web presence through a blog or something else first, because then you're going to have a return on your investment. Otherwise, it's just going to sit there and fester.
I don't think it costs you anything.
No.
But I don't think it gets you much unless you've already got something to amplify. I think it's a force multiplier, but you need some force to begin with.
Okay. Thank you. And one other thing is, how would you define the new writers? I mean, like people that I create like metaphysical, socio-political wonderlands that are science fiction. It's not because they want good science.
You know what? We're not even going to bother defining who you are. Write something good that I want to read, and then let the marketing people at Tor decide where you get slotted. But just write something good. Don't worry about I'm writing metaphysicals, blah, 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 blah. Just write a damn good story.
Right. That is always the basic advice. If
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the point about whether texting and emailing and all of that is a transitional phase, and we're all going to become illiterates when the bandwidth gets higher.
I didn't quite say that.
Well, no, but actually that idea has been around too, because older science fiction had people in the future sending voice recordings to each other instead of letters and being unable to read and things like that. And in fact, the phone was invented more than 100 years ago, and email is much more recent, but there's a lot of purposes for which I would far rather use email than the phone, and I think a lot of people feel the same way. I don't do a lot of texting personally because my cell phone is always turned off, but I know a lot of people are doing it constantly, and presumably they would rather do it than actually make a phone call, which is this old-fashioned technology anyway.
The great thing about emailing is that you can email and then you don't have to pretend like you're not there when the phone, But the other thing is, like, for example, they always, in the 1950s version of the future, everybody has a picture phone. And we have the picture phones, and most people don't actually use picture phones to converse because it's uncomfortable, and most of the time when you're talking to someone, they're sitting there, they're picking their nose or doing, they don't want you to see them. It's like, let's talk, and, so again, all these futuristic things are predicated on people having behavior that is not actually human behavior. So.
I think also with the case of texting, it's easier. I think a lot of people know how to write, and not that many people know how to speak. As though they were in a letter, it's sort of, hi, what? No, I don't know. Whereas you get pithy little comments in print, but the voice is a bit of human contact that maybe some people shy away from. And organizing your thoughts, speaking aloud takes a little bit more, concentration on being there for the other person. And, a lot of people these days aren't that good at that.
You also have a certain amount of trouble editing your voice after it comes out.
Yeah.
And tone of voice.
Some things you can't take back.
Open mouth, insert foot.
I wish people who did instant messages and email remembered that they aren't actually a live medium and that you can actually edit sometimes, because so much would be saved.
Sir.
Yes. I was one time
Could you speak a little closer to the microphone, please?
I go to fanfiction.net like all the time. It's a very popular website for fanfiction writers, and one of my favorite writers there wrote a 1,000-word story on a cell phone, and I was wondering if you would be able to write a whole book on a cell phone or a BlackBerry.
How much are you paying me?
There speaks a professional writer.
Oh my God! Now, in fact, actually, somewhere in Scandinavia, there is an entire novel that is written as text messages, and I know there's a YA that's written as text messages. I don't know if the author actually wrote them on, doing SMS,
yeah.
but it's been kind of done. That writing purely on a cell phone is mostly what I would say would be a stunt writing thing. You do it for fun, but frankly, when I'm writing, what I really want to do is make the transition from brain to page as transparent as possible. That's why I write on a computer, because that's the easiest for me. So writing on a cell phone, you would just have to pay me so much money.
So Warren Ellis, who's the great comics writer, now novelist, gets away from his family by going to the pub, and he's got a little Bluetooth keyboard, and he's got his mobile phone, and he writes everything. He can smoke there, too. I guess I was actually just talking to another friend of Warren's, and we were saying when the smoking ban comes in British pubs, he's probably going to have to stop writing.
Just one more thing. When you said about writing just a damn good story for just and just publish it. Do you have any tips on how to write a damn good story?
I do. They're on my website, and we've got too many other people here asking questions to go into it now. But, the first thing is really actually you just have to have imagination. The second thing you need to do is actually have grammar skills. Because if you can't actually write a damn sentence, you're not going to be able to write a damn story.
The other thing you need to have is persistence, because it does take a certain amount of practice to be able to write a damn good sentence.
Right. The old saying is that every writer has a million words of crap before they write the one thing good. I was fortunate that I wrote all my crap for a newspaper, so I got paid for my crap. But it is still, in fact, true that it's going to take time. I put something on my website. It was advice to teenage writers, and the first thing that it says is, right now your writing sucks. Don't take it personally. When I was a teenager, my writing sucked too, because I was a teenager. I didn't have the experience. And it will eventually not suck. And of course, if teenagers will come in, they're like, you can't say that my writing sucks. I was like,
yes, basically you can.
Yeah.
Sir.
Yeah, I read Old Man's War just recently, and I really liked it. And
good.
I was intrigued by the fact initially that it was kind of like they kept on mentioning Starship Troopers in the actual back of the book. That's what kind of titillated me a little bit when I first read it. But I thought it was pretty original. And where do you draw the line between retreading something that's been done before, yet not plagiarizing and making it original?
Well, Old Man's War is a very special case, and I'll very quickly recapitulate it, which is I wanted to write a book, and more importantly than writing a book, I actually wanted to sell the book. So I went into the local bookstore, and I said, what is selling? And I saw the three Davids. I saw David Feintuch, David Weber, David Drake, and just tons and tons of Bane science fiction, with the guns and the buttons, and I was like, okay, I'm going to write military science fiction, and I modeled it precisely after Starship Troopers, because I knew that was a structure that I could work in. And I was very open about the fact that I was stealing from folks, because otherwise people go, you stole from Robert Heinlein. Yes, I know.
No, it's an homage.
Yeah, exactly. But
Starship Troopers has spawned how many novels now?
Oh, yeah, no.
Lots.
Heinlein's got a lot to answer for wherever he is now. But the fact of the matter is, even if you have all these structures, again, the issue is execution. You do have a few new ideas, and this is going back to the idea of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. My new thing to this was incorporating the older folks and the experiences that they had, and of course John Perry, the feelings that he has for his wife who has passed away. So these are the new things. I don't have any problem with people recycling and doing these things, because themes do, the whole about things not being new is not true. But what happens is that humans are essentially the same people they were 100,000 years ago. They will be essentially the same people they are 100 from now.
I think you just said it's true, but you just made it convoluted.
Well. There are themes that we will come to again and again and again, and that's one of them.
Well, I think amateurs plagiarize and artists steal.
Right.
Ideas are easy. Execution is hard.
Right.
So it's easy to have a million great ideas before breakfast. Writing it, turning any of them into a story that anyone cares about is hard. Mm-hmm. And six good writers who are capable of writing a decent story, who tackle the same idea, will emerge six completely different stories. I mean, this is a field where it's become a rite of passage to do your own version of Nightfall.
Right.
So
yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
This question is actually more for Corey. Your book, Down and Out in Magic Kingdom, I was just curious, as a former cast member, how you looked into that. I mean, I loved it, but how you kind of got.
So I wrote a novel set in Walt Disney World, where the fans take over, and the question is, how did I do the research? Well, so this is the amazing thing about being a writer is the tax deductions. So if you're going to write a novel set in Disney World, all your trips to Disney World are tax deductible.
Sweet.
I just finished a novel about merchandise from theme parks. Everything that I bought at Disneyland was tax deductible. It was totally awesome.
Cool.
I spent a fair bit of time in Disney. I talked cast members. I read the internet a lot, because the internet is full of cast member stuff. Like, do you remember that time we took acid and brought the canoes out and paddled them around, and then we saw the giant rats on Tom Sawyer Island? So there are apparently giant rats on Tom Sawyer Island. Huge feral rats, grown fat and sassy on snack bar droppings.
And a really quick question too. I've heard most authors and purveyors of certain fantasy worlds, like Joss Whedon or whatever really appreciate fan fiction,
Mm-hmm.
and like you guys were saying too, what do your publishers think of fan fiction? Do they have a problem with it? Do they get copyright?
The only time that it's a problem is when you had something like the Lori Jareo case, where this woman put up a fan fiction Queen Amidala thing, and she put it on Amazon, and then she wrote on her website, well, it's not really a copyright violation because I'm only putting it up for friends and my family on Amazon.
On Amazon.
And
Yes.
she'd gone to places where she'd done she'd done signings with that book. Technically,
Do we know how many copies she sold?
she did get an Amazon spike before they pulled it. So, and I wonder if those were actually fulfilled. So, the thing about it is, it's one of those don't ask, don't tell situations where if you've got Anne Rice who is adamantly against it, then the publisher, she is going to get some people to come down hard on it. If you want to write fan fiction in the Old Man of the War universe, I don't care. Don't show it to me. Have fun with it, but
Don't try to make money off it.
Yeah, don't try to
basically.
make money. If you make money, then I'll have to unleash the dogs of
I think that one of the places where it really matters is anytime there's film rights involved, the publishers' lawyers tend to be a lot more level-headed about this stuff than studios' lawyers.
Right.
So you do get a lot of kind of little girl, we need to talk about your Harry Potter fan fiction
Right.
phone calls, which are just crazy. But it's less important when there's no film deals involved.
Right.
Thanks.
No.
Hey, how you doing? Corey, you'd mentioned earlier about how in writing science fiction, you're filling the pockets with present-day things. It seems to me, and I could be wrong, but during Vietnam, being in war times, during Vietnam, there seemed to be such an outcry, especially from the science fiction writing community, mirroring what was going on in this fake world to what is actually happening in the real world. There doesn't seem to be that same kind of outcry, and maybe I'm just not reading.
Yeah,
the right
you're not
thing.
reading it. There's
No.
so
Really?
much
Oh, yeah.
Department of Homeland Security paranoia, terranoia.
Oh, God.
Ken
Tell me-
McLeod has got a book coming out called The Execution Channel that scared the hell out of me. That's just this amazing Orwellian story. I've got a young adult novel coming out next May called Little Brother about hacker kids in San Francisco who declare war on the Department of Homeland Security.
Tell them about the anthology that just came out.
Yeah, there's an anthology that just came out in the UK. So in the UK, they passed a law making it glorify terrorism. So there's an anthology of science fiction stories that glorify terrorism. That's just coming out in the UK called Glorifying Terrorism, edited by Farrah Mendelssohn. It's a very good anthology.
You also have to remember there are other things too. That there is, aside from writing, short fiction, which goes on a slightly faster schedule. There's 2 years usually between when you finish a book and when it comes out. So you are going to see a lot of, like he's saying, this stuff is coming out now. It's stuff that was being written in process a couple years ago.
The next William Gibson book's about NSA illegal wiretapping.
Right. So it's in process. You will see it, and then 10 years from now, people will go, "Oh yeah, you remember they were really against it because they have that literature. It's just 2 steps behind because that's publishing schedules."
And
Yep.
the other thing to remember is that there were 2 sides to every argument. I remember in the Vietnam War, there was a large full-page advertisement in Galaxy signed by people saying, "Yes, let's get out immediately," and on the opposite page was another full-page ad signed by just as many people saying, "Let's go stomp the crap out of North Vietnam." I mean,
Galaxy had small pages. It was a digest, right?
Yeah.
It was a digest.
No, but they were rival SIFWA
Yeah,
ads.
sure.
Yeah.
The print
yeah.
was small.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not really sure what I'm asking or saying.
If you add, what
Well,
do you
then
think
you'll
of
be
that at
satisfied with
end?
the
We'll
answer
pretend it's a
regardless,
question.
probably.
Make it
We're
tough for
talking
us.
sort of about the here, the there, the past, the present, the future. The past, Heinlein, Asimov. I don't know near enough to say anything about it. And then like the present, which is kind of, for me, kind of a mix of like, Heinlein or CH, whatever the names, I can't remember them now, and like manga and anime and comic books and lots of stuff you see at the Comic-Con, which I love to attend. And like, what's the idea of maybe like those things suddenly becoming the new science fiction? Suddenly you have,
What do you mean suddenly? They're already there.
already there, like, almost more mainstream because it's not nearly as well known. And what's the idea of like going out into other fields and like suddenly, like the Heinlein of our day doing like manga in Japan or something?
He's probably doing that.
Neil Gaiman.
Yeah, Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman who started in comic books. I think that the greatest science fiction writer of the current generation will probably make a video game. Like I like to reread Half-Life. I like to
It was
reread.
written by a great science fiction
Yeah,
writer,
Mark
by the way,
Laidlaw.
Mark Laidlaw.
Like Mark Laidlaw. I like to reread Half-Life 2. And it's not the same thing. Again, it's not even writers. It's talking about creators. Yes, we're going to have new media. Yes, we're going to have people who are going to be massively influential, and they are in college right now, and you have to embrace that. I mean. Print will survive, video games will survive, TV, all of these former medias. Every time a new media comes up that's very successful, the other medias don't disappear. They just become part of the panoply.
The future composts.
Right, exactly.
Ms. Baker said that she writes science fiction and fantasy. I think Philip K. Dick said that it's a subjective difference, often in the eyes of the reader as well as the author, where science fiction is the fiction of what's possible, or what the reader or author sees as possible, whereas fantasy is what the reader or author sees as impossible. So I'd be interested in hearing what you think.
Can I touch this one? As you say, science fiction is the art of seeing what is possible and writing about it. Fantasy is thinking you can make a living as a science fiction writer. Not mine. I steal it, but I steal it cheerfully.
I wrote something about this because every 6 months or so, like clockwork, there's the fantasy v science fiction argument online, and I said this is how you tell the difference between fantasy versus science fiction, which is you ask your main character, hey protagonist, that object you have, that Deus Ex Machina object you have on your belt, what powers it? And if they say why it's a hydrogen fuel cell that is worth that will work for 10,000 rotations of the planet around the sun, then it's science fiction. If it's it's the spirit of the Dark Lord, then it's fantasy. Thank you and good night.
Kate, did you want to answer that?
No, just essentially the same thing. If there's magic in it, it's fantasy.
Well, it seems like some of the best fantasy at least gives you an intuition of what's making the stuff work, instead of just waving its hands.
The more plausible something is, the better story it is.
Right.
I mean, when Zelazny wrote fantasy, because he had several novels in which, the Amber series, magic happens. And the thing is, and there was another one, and I forget the name, he was dealing with the magician could perceive possibilities hanging in ribbons, and he just would be able to reach out and grasp the one that he wanted and pull it in. Zelazny was able to treat of magic in such a way, to explain it and get a plausible sounding way that it worked, that it almost seemed like a science. It was very entertaining, much more so than, thousands of years ago there was this ring.
Right.
And it's really scary.
Well, so on the other hand, my last book is a book about a guy whose father is a mountain and whose mother is a washing machine, and whose brothers are variously undead and a trio of nesting Russian dolls, but they're engaged in building a free wireless network. So, I don't know if that's fantasy or
like
science
you do.
fiction. I think that magic is probably an incomplete, whether there's magic or not, is probably an incomplete definition.
Yeah. The other thing is that science fiction tends to be more democratic in its use. Anybody can use a phaser. Only Harry Potter can use his wand. So.
Ooh, let's not even get into
Harry Potter's wand.
Harry Potter's wand. The fanfic.
Please.
Yes, I'm curious about your backgrounds as far as scientific training. I know Harry was saying that your background is history.
I flunked out of Caltech at the end of my freshman year and ended up doing history instead.
I have a degree in philosophy, and I stopped being able to do math at the quadratic equation.
I was educated in liberal arts convent schools. In English, and then I went away and did the Renaissance Fair for 20 years. But I knew a lot of very brilliant people who, were physicists and so forth, and they talked and I listened. They made notes.
I dropped out of 4 universities and never got a degree, but my father was a computer scientist, and I was raised with computers and the internet. I dropped out of school to be a programmer and founded a peer-to-peer software company, and then went on to work for a civil rights group first in America and then in Europe on issues around technology, privacy, and free speech. So that's kind of how I got into where I am.
But as far as actually hard science,
autodidact.
University?
There are lots of science fiction writers who have in fact have science degrees and do hard science. I mean, Will McCarthy is an example.
Werner Vinge.
Greg Benford.
Right. So there are tons. It's just this is a highly unrepresentative panel.
So do you do a lot of research?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Ironically, because one of the reasons I got into science fiction is that I could hopefully I wouldn't have to do any,
You could just create a world.
But
and
it turned out to be lies, terrible lies. You actually have to do you have to do research. Otherwise, the thing with that happened with Larry Niven. He made Ringworld, and then he went to MIT, and he had a bunch of
Another
chanting engineers.
Caltech flunk out, by the way.
Yeah, bunch of chanting engineers going, Ringworld is unstable. Ringworld is unstable. Ringworld is unstable. And thus was born Ringworld Engineers.
So I have this weblog where whenever something that seems like it might be a piece of a puzzle, although most of them are just blue sky, comes along, I write it up, summarize it as tightly as I can, and put it on Boing Boing. And that incidentally generates advertising revenue. We have about 2 million unique readers a day, and that's very nice. And those people help me out with other things that I might be interested in. But the most important thing is the mnemonic effect of writing down all of these little snippets, and this is my ongoing research. It's a kind of research for a book that I don't know that I'm writing. Right. And eventually you find enough corner pieces, and then you build the edges, and then you start to fill in the story, and you've got the whole book. So the book that's coming out next May is 100,000 words long. I wrote it in 8 weeks. It's very research intensive, and I never left the house. It was all stuff that I'd already blogged and hadn't known was research until the time came to write the book.
Okay, we're going to take one more because we really are out of time. I think.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the last
You
one.
are going. Yep.
No pressure.
Boy.
Make it good.
Really good.
We're talking about technology evolving, changing, evolving. I can recall going to the casting company when I was in 3rd grade, little tiny. Was just tall enough to see over the printer. We were there to see the UNIVAC.
Yeah.
And I have embraced anything that's come down the pike since then with just joyous abandon because it made everything easier. I'm one of the people who, I'm text messaging, I've got the blog. I have Messenger up every time I'm sitting at a computer for more than 5 minutes. What I find is the difference between science fiction and fantasy is that in most cases fantasy works better. They've gotten over the hump of making the interface actually work. The cookbooks on the computer, great idea, loved it, but then the data entry killed me. And none of these people publishing cookbooks actually thought this was important to actually do the databases to support the releases.
What is the question?
The question is, where would you think the most important thing when you're building a new idea should come from? Is it the actual ability for somebody to actually use it, or does it have to look really whiz-bang pretty?
This is the difference between Hollywood and writing.
Write anything.
I just think I just like cool ideas. I don't think that you necessarily have to make anything practical. You can throw something out there, see if it flies. One of the worst things that happened to science fiction very recently, I think we're now getting over it, is it had a terrible fear of failure, where they would suggest something or do something, and what happens 5 years from now when something replaces this and is going to be outdated? I think you can throw anything out there just as a thought, and as long as you make it entertaining, whether it's practical or not is simply not an issue. It just should be fun to read.
One of the most, I was lucky enough to meet Theodore Sturgeon a couple of times, and one of the most liberating things he ever said to me, because I was just at the point where I was starting to sell, and he said, "I give you permission to do it wrong."
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really freed up my mind. I think where you start with an idea, where you go with an idea, whether it starts from a person, whether it starts from an event, whether it starts from a title, whatever, will depend on the story and on the idea.
So Don Norman is this great technology design guru, and he used to be very austere. He wrote this famous book called The Design of Everyday Things, where he elevated function above form in all things, and he chastised engineers who made things pretty instead of making them work. And he repudiated himself and wrote a book that I think of as kind of the Feng Shui school of technology design called Emotional Design, in which he posits that the natural state of technology is broken. And given that everything fails most of the time, how you feel about it when it breaks is the most important thing, because that gives you, if you feel calm and happy, it gives you the emotional state from which to nurse it along, even though it's not working. Whereas if you're angry and bitter, you just kind of clobber it more and more. And so he's written this kind of great manifesto in favor of things like the Mini and the new VW Beetle and the Mac and so on, all these things that are playful and pretty, because to the extent that they make you feel warm and happy when the technology fails to work as intended, they also give you the mental tools to overcome their failures.
Right. You are not warm and happy when your Mac's hard drive goes down, trust me. Gage, last comment?
No, I think that's brilliant.
It's Don Norman, not me.
Yeah. I have a PT Cruiser, and I love that little thing. And I have a catalog, and it's like, look, this will make it look even more like a 1930s car.
Thank you, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.